Welcome to the East Asia by Rhodes Murphy Chapter Summary Podcast at the Historian's Eye. Please subscribe, and if you'd like to be notified when new episodes appear, click the bell icon. Chapter 3, The Zhou, Its Decline and the Age of Philosophers. The Rise and Decline of the Zhou. The rise of the Zhou dynasty around 1050 BCE did not signal any major changes from life under the Shang. King Wen and King Wu founded the dynasty. Both shifted their capitals several times. Bronzes remained an important indicator of status. Development in writing continued. Shamans and oracle bone divination maintained a role in society, although a lesser one, perhaps since the Zhou were a more militarized society than the Shang. Conflicts with barbarian groups, experienced by both dynasties, contributed to the demise of the Zhou after 200 years of rule in the 9th century BCE. An increase in the amount of land controlled under the Zhou dynasty leads to the development of a feudal system, roughly occurring between 1050 BCE and 500 BCE. Different from European feudalism, Zhou feudalism was based on family ties. Like European feudalism, the central authority attempted extension of land holdings while still maintaining a central control over the Zhou king. But as each evolving state grew more independent, it provided less aid to the Zhou over time. Serfs were tied to the lord's territory, and were probably obligated to give priority to the lord's fields. The Chinese word for feudal, or fengjian, means to appoint or establish. The Zhou appointed lesser members of their imperial clan, as well as prominent members of other families with land in new territories. The principal source of knowledge for the Zhou dynasty comes from the Zhou commentary. The kings took the title Son of Heaven. The capital was the chief religious center. Under Zhou reign, the written language developed significantly. Historical, literary, and philosophical texts were produced and are considered important classic Chinese texts. The 5 classics are the Book of Changes, a manual on divination, the Book of Songs, which is lyrical poetry, the Book of Rites, which describes rites and rituals, the Spring and Summer Annals, which records the events from 722 to 481 BCE, and Zhou Shang, which is a supplement to the latter. Technology and the economy. A key development under the Zhou, one that evidently contributed to its decline as a governing power, was iron technology. Iron technology led to improved agricultural irrigation and increased land holdings for agricultural use. This in turn led to an increase in population. Agricultural surpluses allowed for the development of work outside farming, particularly military service. Towns and cities became important centers of trade for merchants, where they had formerly been limited as government seats for royal families. One of the changes in society was that the system of aristocrats and serfs was deemed outmoded. At the same time, vassals were becoming more independent and evolving into separate states, many breaking away from the Zhou and forming rival kingdoms. The end of the Zhou came when the Zhou king was driven out, traditionally assumed to be about 841 BCE. The king was restored, but for less than a century. In 771 BCE, barbarians that were allied with Zhou vassals invaded the capital city, resulting in the death of the king. This is the first reliable date in Chinese history. The capital was re-established in Luoyang in 770 BCE, and it was closer to royal domains. Eastern Zhou is the name given for the period from 771 BCE. The name Western Zhou was a name given to Zhou rule up to 771 BCE. The Warring States period, 453 BCE to 221 BCE. The Warring States period is a result of Zhou collapse. It is also called the Hundred Schools period because of the many philosophical schools that it gave rise to. A dozen political and culturally independent states or rival kingdoms fought each other and outlying nomadic groups for dominance. The Zhou were a nominal power. None of the states constituted China. Each of them was politically distinct. No dominant culture or group existed. While technologies passed quickly from one group to another, a multiplicity of languages and scripts existed, each group as different from others as European states, without the common language provided by Latin. An example of these states is the Zhou. It was located in the central Yangtze Valley and was one of the largest of the warring states. It was also very agriculturally productive. It had strong literary traditions and developed a powerful navy. It was defeated by a coalition of states in 632 and 301 BCE. Throughout this period, warfare increased. Better agricultural yields allowed states to grow larger armies. Foot soldiers were increasingly important, diminishing the place of aristocrats. Coins became common, and roads improved. While the Zhou called many of the states barbarians, many at least were as sophisticated as the Zhou. Larger peripheral states were the first to discard feudalism. These states were also increasing, and they put in place bureaucracies, systems of coinage, and state monopolies. The vulnerable northern states began to build long walls. Mounted warriors became more important in these areas. Military guides appeared, the most famous of which was The Art of War, credited to Sun Tzu, or Master Sun. The Qin began to dominate in the 200s BCE. It overwhelmed other states between 231 and 221 BCE. The disruption led philosophers to consider how to restore order. Confucius, the sage and his teachings. Confucius, from about 551 to about 479 BCE, was born in one of the smaller states in the Shandong province. He was more or less a contemporary of the Buddha, and died shortly after the birth of Socrates. In China, he is referred to as Confucius, or Master Kong, as he was a member of the Kong family, who were low-level aristocrats. His family arranged for his education, and he worked primarily as the teacher of literacy, classics, and his own philosophy. Occasionally, he acted as a consultant to the various feudal lords. There is nothing available written directly from Confucius. Like Socrates, who we only know through Plato, we consider Confucius through the writings of his disciples. The most notable text, the Analects, was compiled centuries after his death. His teachings stress the importance of education and the influence of good examples. He asserts that harmony in society is the result of educated men who follow the example of one's superiors and avoid conflicts unless absolutely necessary. The ideal man in Confucian terms is one who pursues the right moral course, no matter the consequences, even to the expense of his own self-interest. Many scholars argue that Confucius is a set of ethical rules and not a religion. The teachings avoid theological concerns like the afterlife and emphasize practical concerns. As a result, the people of East Asia supplemented his teaching with Buddhism, Taoism, and Shintoism. Despite his personal feelings, he is credited as the founder of one of the most important philosophical, moral, and ethical systems in history as measured by the number of people in China, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam who follow the guidance of his teachings. Confucius inspired many followers, who passed on and elaborated on his teachings, sometimes with significant modifications. All shared with their master a conviction of a previous golden age, to whose virtues they sought to return. Mencius. Mencius is a Latinized form of Mengzi, who lived from 732 to 289 BCE and became the most famous follower and commenter on Confucius. Like his mentor, he lived during the period of the Warring States and was concerned with restoring order through individual morality. Order is established through right relationships. These relationships were well established by this time, and were hierarchical and carefully defined. They are superior-subordinate relationships, where the person in the superior role has responsibility and obligation, as well as authority. There are 5 basic relationships: father-son, ruler-subject, husband-wife, elder brother-younger brother, and friend-to-friend. It is important to note that the teachings of Confucius and Mencius were not revolutionary. They more or less offered doctrinal support and expanded upon ideas already present in the culture. Mencius and Confucius believed in natural goodness and believed that this quality could be encouraged. These relationships work when people behave according to the Confucian virtues: filial piety, loyalty, obedience, and fraternity. The virtuous must also have culture, manners, and observe rituals. Right action and manners were believed to lead to correct attitude, and ritual was key. Music played an important role in rituals, and was seen to help create proper moral behavior. According to Confucius, law does not guarantee proper behavior or social order. The social system has already broken down if force or punishment must be used. While supporters of a hierarchical social order, their teaching stressed education and self-development. Therefore, anyone could achieve status as a sage. Later, government officials were selected based on ability to pass on imperial examinations, making it possible for someone to achieve status and responsibility within the government regardless of their social origins. Loyalty to superiors was a key tenet of Confucian thought, yet moral principle was considered more important. Therefore, there was space allowed within the strict hierarchical system to rebel against unjust rulers. The point of working hard and striving for achievement was a desire to enjoy life through the pleasures of food, producing children, living to an old age, surrounded by one's descendants. Another philosopher during this period was Zhou, who lived from about 300 to 237 BCE. Zhou was a prominent Confucian who disagreed with Mencius regarding human nature. He felt that humans were not intrinsically good and that human emotions and desire led to conflict. He argued that they must be redirected through education towards moral virtue. He also opposed Taoist teachings. He believed that the main guide for good behavior and wisdom was lei, or an inner sense of what was proper. He encouraged ritual, education, and strict hierarchical social roles. He also supported authoritarian government and felt that society should be governed not just by lei, but also by defining laws and punishments. Confucianism and heaven. Confucius was clear in regarding nature not as a mouthpiece of heaven, but as a guide to harmony and order. He was also clear in not aspiring to understanding the unseen. Human society was considered a mirror itself on the organization and rules of the natural universe and heaven. Natural calamities disturbed Confucian social order and were seen as signs of heaven's displeasure with human behavior, specifically the ruler. His teaching referred to nature and heaven as an impersonal force greater than humans. Confucius supported ancestor worship, which is better described as a veneration or commemoration of ancestors. By 4000 BCE, it was incorporated into state rituals. Zhou, who lived from 1130 to 1200 CE, speculated further on the nature of the universe and discussed a supreme, ultimate, or impersonal cosmic force resulting in what is now referred to as Neo-Confucianism. Confucianism never developed a formal priesthood or set of rituals. However, temples were built in the main cities where people known as priests hold services. Confucianism did become the state religion under the Han Dynasty, and the emperor presided over annual rituals. Confucianism stressed collective effort, hard work, education, and dedication to the interests of the larger groups, like family, work unit, and state, which is also reflected in East Asian values today. It provides a balance between self-development and achievement for the individual, and subservience to something larger, the greater good of the group. Another philosopher was Mozi. Mozi was born around the time of the death of Confucius, and represents just one of many opposing schools of thought. He is particularly important in that his teachings revealed Confucius's influence for some time before they were completely rejected by the 3rd century BCE. Mozi directly attacked Confucius' thought in his teachings and stressed the need for logic and utilitarianism. He advocated a notion of universal love that criticized graded love, or the strict hierarchical relationships promoted by Confucius and his followers. He called for an end to hereditary power, which was achieved by Qin a few centuries later. He also called for a limitation of food, clothing, shelter, and other things besides the bare necessities. He argued that ceremonial rituals, music, and art were problematic. Another school of thought were the naturalists, who were concerned with such ideas as yang and yin, light and dark, male and female, and also with the 5 phases of nature: wood, metal, fire, water, and earth. Taoism. Taoism, or the Way, was the second major philosophical school of thought that emerged during the period of the Warring States. Its response to the chaos and conflict was a withdrawal from all worldly and political matters, seeking solace and tranquility from the cosmos and nature. It was based on earlier notions, and it possibly drew on older nature worship. Taoism can be considered a critique of Confucianism. It rejected strict social rules, community life, and education. This is a radically different point of view when compared with Confucianism. Doing what comes naturally and a withdrawing into oneself were among the most important aspects of Taoism. The main text, the Tao Te Ching, or the Classic of the Way, is a collection of mystical remarks attributed to Lao Tzu, or the Old One, but was most likely compiled by a number of authors in the 3rd century BCE. Since Taoism encourages silence and rejects education, its texts are written in riddles, juxtapositions of opposites, and parallels with nature. The main point of the text is that people should follow the guidance of nature, relax, and go with the flow. Another important text is Zhuangzi. It was named after a philosopher who died about 328 BCE, although it was also likely compiled by various individuals in the 3rd century BCE. The text consists of stories about Zhuangzi's life following the Tao. Taoism merged with other belief systems, including folk religions, and grew into a mass religion. Taoist priests, temples, and monastic orders developed. Ironically, it developed to be a much more organized religion than Confucianism. It also developed a pantheon of gods and immortals, as well as a version of the Buddhist heaven. Later Taoists, most notably under the Han Dynasty, experimented with medicinal herbs and contributed greatly to Chinese medicine and technology. This is also ironic since Taoism stressed the acceptance of nature without questioning it. Taoism developed in opposition to Confucianism, and Confucian followers officially scorned Taoists. Yet it was, and still is, common for people to appreciate and practice tenets of both. The two philosophies were similar in that both revered nature and the arts. More importantly, perhaps, the existence of both appealed to an older Chinese sense of harmonious balance. Confucian social reform complemented Taoist notions of passivity and simply accepting the world as it is. Legalism. Legalism was a new school of philosophy and peaked in popularity during the Qin dynasty. Composed of the so-called disciples of Sun Tzu, it promoted strict laws as the only way to ensure order. Some of its tenets were incorporated into later ideas of empire. The role of women. Little is known about the role of women in ancient and classical China. Confucius texts make women subservient to male members of the family, yet it appears that they played an important and powerful role. The Tao Te Ching suggests that women are unknowable and powerful. and the ancient concept of yin-yang stresses an important role for femininity in the balance of things. The Chinese language. The Chinese written language started expanding into the rest of East Asia with the building of the Qin Han Empire. As all languages, it both reflects the East Asian culture and contributes to the construction of the culture. Writing began somewhere in the world with pictographs rather than phonetic symbols. However, a pictograph system of writing still flourishes in East Asia, despite the recent adoption of the pinyin system, or the romanization of language with Western letters. The importance of written language to Chinese culture is one of the main reasons it never wholly adopted the phonetic system. The characters are viewed as containing an inherent magic-like quality, which was first recognized on the oracle bones. Inscriptions, even on paper, for weddings or funerals, are still seen as possessing power. The power lies in the characters themselves. Bad consequences can arise from the destruction of the characters. Characters for names are chosen because they contain special meaning. Calligraphy has historically been seen as the most important art form, and it is an important example of the inherited power of the characters. The characters have changed little over time, stressing the important role of the past and maintaining continuity. This is in contrast with Western societies, where few can read the ancient Greek text. Sense of value in history, past, respect and reverence for written record contribute to the unchanging nature of language. The structure of the Chinese language. Many Chinese words are monosyllables, so characters help distinguish them. Some are compounds of 2 or 3 monosyllables. Spoken language consists mostly of compounds, or 2 or 3 monosyllable words. The meanings of words that sound similar when spoken are distinguished by the spoken tone used when pronouncing the word. Level, rising, falling, or a combination of rising and falling. There is an absence of tenses, cases, and articles. Some meaning is often dependent on the context, or additional monosyllables are used to indicate past, present, etc. It is important to remember that while written Chinese has changed very little, spoken Chinese has most likely changed often over time. Administration of a vast empire with dramatic regional differences was made possible with a common writing system learned through the education system. Mandarin is what Westerners typically call, quote, official speech, and a cultural emphasis on education has contributed to the lasting influence of the written characters. Differences in the spoken language endure. The one written language is universal in China. Cantonese was originally a separate language, related to or identical to Vietnamese. The language is now basically the same as Mandarin in its written form, though the pronunciation is different. Tibetan, Mongol, and Uyghur are exceptions, being wholly different from Han Chinese. Despite the number of characters that have been memorized, which is at least 5,000 just to read a newspaper, East Asia has relatively high literacy rates. Contemporary Japan has the highest in the world. Written Chinese is considered the language of learning in East Asia, and indeed the region owes much of its identity to the shared written system. Until about a century ago, books written in Korea and Vietnam, and many written in Japan, were in classical Chinese, rather than in each of the country's own developed language. Educated citizens in each country can still read Chinese. An effort to increase literacy and the necessity of incorporating new technologies into the language has resulted in contemporary changes. The Chinese government has recently simplified many of the characters, and the addition of computers in society has replaced the need to handwrite the characters. The contemporary government has also unofficially adopted the pinyin system. Adoption of non-East Asian words also occurs. Foreign words are often a challenge. They are usually simply transliterated in Korean and Japanese, but transformed into more meaningful equivalents in Chinese.